Hi, Misha here, and in our continuing look at U.S. military attack craft, the ones with the A designation, we go from the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk, which was the first kind of attack jet, a light attack jet, used by the Navy. It was small and came in under budget, underweight. It was simple, dependable, durable. And now we're going to move to the A-5 Vigilante, which is almost exactly its polar opposite. This is a large, heavy, complicated, and expensive machine, but that's not to say it's not effective, and did not see many years of use. And as always, we have a 1/72 scale model die cast from Hobby Master. This thing is so heavy, it's mostly all metal, that it's actually hard to spin on the Lazy Susan here. And it actually kind of wants to rotate itself a bit, so I'll probably be moving this as much as usual. Funny. Well, this began as a project at North American in 1952-53, looking to develop a new bomber, long-range strike aircraft, jet-powered, supersonic for the Navy, carrier-based in other words. They worked with it, and in 1955 they sold the Navy on the concept, and in 56 the Navy gave a contract to North American to continue development and eventually go into production. And in the summer of 1958, the prototype took its first maiden flight. And as usual, after some bugs were worked out, the first production models were delivered in 1961 to the Navy, originally designated as the A-3J, A-3J-1 for the first model, and then later the A-3J-2 for the second, and so on. Later the name would be changed to the A-5A and A-5B respectively in September of 1962, when McNamara had his plan for all the branches to kind of use a unified naming designating system. So that's where it comes from, and therefore the A-5 Vigilante was born, and then quickly completely changed what it was meant to do. Originally, this was a nuclear strike bomber for the Navy. It had an internal weapons bay capable of carrying one large nuclear weapon, a Mark 27 or a Mark 28. It could also carry additional bombs on the wings. It had two external hardpoints. It was, at the time, the largest, heaviest, most complicated carrier-based aircraft in the U.S. arsenal. Even today, it's impressively large. It's over 76 feet long, with a wingspan of just right at 53 feet. It was a fast critter. It could get up to Mach 2, over 1,300 miles per hour. It could climb up to 52,000 feet, so it had a pretty high ceiling. It had a pilot and a bombardier in the cockpit, so a standard crew of 2. At the time, It had very advanced electronics. In fact, it had an early digital computer on board. It was also an early fly-by-wire aircraft, although it had mechanical backups because, again, new technology. It had an interesting linear bomb bay where the bomb would be contained with fuel tanks, and when the bomb was jettisoned, the fuel tanks would be jettisoned along with it, so it was kind of a packet system. It was not a dogfighter, it was a bomber. It was designed for speed and maneuverability and range. It was actually fitted with the same engines as used in the McDonnell, later McDonnell Douglas, F4 Phantom, which was coming into use around the same time. However, right as it was being adopted, its role would very quickly change. As I said originally, this was honestly a nuclear strike bomber. That was its primary purpose when it started to be delivered in 1961. But very quickly, within the first few years, the Navy started employing it with missiles and using it as an anti-submarine attack craft. But even then, that wasn't really its best destiny. It quickly was apparent that a nuclear strike bomber wasn't going to be of much use, hopefully, at least. And of course, the anti-submarine airplane really had different requirements. So in the end, what was initially known as the A-3J-3P, later designated the A-5C, or I should say RA-5C, Vigilante, the reconnaissance version, quickly became the need that this would fill. As early as summer of '63, the Navy started transitioning over to the RA-5C, and this would ultimately end up being the most common version. Of the 167 A-5s built, including all variants, 137 were either purpose-built RA-5Cs, or they were A-5As and A-5Bs upgraded and converted to the reconnaissance version. The Navy started flying the Recon version in Vietnam in 1964. It was used to take photographs of bomb sites before and after. They would fly over beforehand and then fly after a bombing raid to see how effective it was. And of course, to this end, the internal bomb bay was given over to fuel and, of course, many cameras underneath. And having the advanced electronics that it did of the time really helped out, of course, here. Throughout the war, these would be used extensively, and about 27 would be lost. Most were either shot down by AA batteries, anti-aircraft guns, or SAM sites, anti-aircraft missiles, with only a handful, just a few, very few, actually shot down by MiGs, because this was a fast and quite maneuverable aircraft. Others were lost to accidents and mishaps. You know, that happens in a combat theater. To that end, production had basically wrapped up at North American in 1963 as this plane's role changed and they realized they only needed 150 or so. But after losses in Vietnam, they would actually go back and make a few more, around 3 dozen, in the late 60s to replace planes lost through attrition. But also at this point, this plane's electronics were getting dated, and also they were fickle. This was a hard plane to maintain and keep flying. Again, it had first generation digital computers and a very early fly-by-wire system, and by the late 60s, second and even third generations of these systems were coming into use. So really this was one of the planes first on the chopping block as the Navy cut things back as it pulled out of Vietnam. So these started to be pulled out in 1974. That's not to say they weren't used. I mean, the Navy ended up having 10 squadrons of RA-5Cs. 8 of those served in Vietnam at one point or another, so it definitely was there. But obviously with, around 150 or so in service, most were pulled out in the mid-late 70s, and the final combat deployment occurred on the USS Ranger in 1979. So as 1980 rolled around, this plane was retired from frontline service. It was never used by the Air Force or the Marines. It was exclusively a Navy plane, and it really was built to fulfill a very specific need, which it never thankfully had to do. And so it was put into another need for reconnaissance, which it fulfilled quite well. But again, it was big and expensive. And also it's worth pointing out that it took up a lot of hangar space on carriers, even with the large carriers coming into use, like the Enterprise. In that time, it still took up a lot of space, and so it limited what else could be stored on board. This combined with naval fighters of that day, first the F-4, later the F-14, and so on, were getting bigger and bigger themselves. So it was, with respect, retired out, which honestly saved the Navy quite a bit of money, too. And so that was the career of the A-5 Vigilante. And the Hobbymaster model here, being of the RA-5C, is probably of the most famous and important version, because it was much more used as a reconnaissance than it ever was an anti-submarine or nuclear strike fighter-bomber attack craft. So it's good that they did it. It's a very simple, sleek design, if large, and because of its design, it is mostly metal, making this one of the biggest and heaviest models Hobbymaster has done. I have to admit, it's a little plain. There's not really ordnance that it comes with. I mean, you do get 2 crew figures, landing gear that can be up or down, but there's not really any moving parts. I was kind of hoping maybe the tail would move, because it was an interesting tail system where the whole thing kind of moved, but I don't think it does. On these Hobbymasters, if I don't know for sure something moves, I don't go trying to move it. Seems safer that way. I didn't know for a little bit that my MiG-23's wings moved. I thought they should, but I wasn't going to go pulling on it till I could confirm it. But it's a neat airplane, and it kind of foreshadows, it's that interesting gap between old and new. It does have a modern look to it when you look at some aspects, but then it also has like a early jet look at other aspects. So it's one of those transitional planes that you look at, and it definitely fits into that era. I mean, it was going into service around the same time as the F-4 Phantom. And many of the Century series. But it's a neat model, and a definitely interesting piece of old Vietnam history. Alrighty, well, as I said, we first started off with a small, light, simple plane. Now we're at a very big, heavy, complex plane. And we'll continue on with the attack series. Any questions or comments, please do post them below. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And this was one of the models that I acquired from Pete's Collectibles. And if you're interested in Cold War history yourself, or diecast models, if you'd like to use the code Misha, M-I-S-H-A, down at Pete's, you'll get 15% off, and you'll get a little break on shipping, either free or reduced. So just mentioning it. Anyway, appreciate you tuning in, and if you could, please do again next time. This is Misha, and hope to see you there.